I have seen the beautiful Amanita Muscaria mushroom in a few different locations around the world in my life, and I hadn't ever really given it more than a passing glance until that all changed around the beginning of this year, 2018. I was doing a very nice Helpex exchange in the Takaka Hills in Golden Bay. It's a very good place. Without going into detail of the place itself too much, it was a very nice location, very quiet, peaceful, no electricity. But then, in the surrounding woodland, there was a huge collection of the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and one of my fellow Helpexers was sort of joking around, saying how these are the king psychedelic mushroom, and he actually hadn't had any experience himself. He had just heard stories, and he sparked my curiosity. However, I was at the beginning anyway shrugging off his casual jokes as, yeah, sure, whatever, just like most people around the world, I thought they were poisonous, and but then one day I decided to do some research online. And I looked up a collection of articles, a lot on the Erowid website, which is a fantastic website with a huge library of psychedelic experiences. And when I went on there, I was incredibly surprised by some of the experiences that people had written about. Some of them were transcendental, to say the very least. There was a few train wrecks on there, and people had very bad experiences. Some people had very scary experiences, but they were good in the end. They taught them a very valuable lesson they wouldn't have learned otherwise. So I was reading all of this and I got incredibly excited and my curiosity piqued. And it just so happens that on that same day, another member of the crew happened to find 11 of these mushrooms. When I returned, we decided, okay, that's it, let's give it a go. I spent about 10 hours researching the effects, how to prepare them, and all of this kind of stuff. I discovered that you have to dry them out very, very thoroughly to convert the ibotonic acid into muscimol, which is the poisonous chemical, into the psychoactive chemical. I believe that's very important. So we gathered the mushrooms, we, almost very, very eager now to see the effects. And luckily, the host of the Helpex, she went to her house for a few days a week, so we gave them to her and she dried them out. And then she comes back, gives us the mushrooms, and we set aside a whole day to begin on this journey. And so there was 5 of us who were staying there and the host herself, but only 3 of us were going to take the mushrooms. And so we prepared a nice quiet area. We did a small opening ceremony involving incense, candle, and the Palo Santo's bark. It was all very, very nice, and we treated this mushroom as a sacred object, as I believe this mushroom should be treated as such. We all ingested our mushrooms after saying a short prayer, asking for protection or whatever the individual wished to ask for. And after that, we began to meditate. And it's worth mentioning, I probably had about 12 grams. My other 2 friends, I think it was 10 and 8. But they had more of the caps. I had more of the stalks and dusty stuff. I don't know if that matters too much. I've heard a little bit that there's more of the psychoactive chemical in the caps, but I'm not absolutely sure on this. So anyway, we begin to meditate. And then we did some qigong, and then we came back to where we had started the opening ceremony. And by that point, my female friend who was with us, she had actually thrown up. She was sick, and I believe that severely reduces the impact these mushrooms have. As you are throwing up, most of them, your body doesn't digest it all properly. And my other friend, he was, a bit quiet and didn't really say much, but after an hour and a half, he had also thrown up. Me, on the other hand, I had noticed just a bit of increased energy. I was a little bit fidgety, but I'd also read that sometimes people go to sleep they wake up after having incredible dreams, and then they wake up and they're in the trip. So I tried to go to sleep, but it wasn't happening. My mind was just going too fast. I was not tired. So after about half an hour of that, I gave up. But I had very strong increased energy, so I decided to try and use it. And discovering that the process we had done had made these mushrooms safe to ingest, I wanted to try and find some more. So again, I went into the surrounding woodlands, and I was going pretty fast, trying to find some more to prepare for another trip. I was very happy to find out that these mushrooms are safe. But then whilst I was doing that, I had recalled what was supposedly the old shamans, the ancient shamans used to do, is they would drink their own piss to reabsorb any musky mold that was not absorbed through the body. And, there was no hesitation in my mind what I had to do. As soon as I had the urge to piss, I pissed in a bottle, and I drank it very, very fast. I think it was better to not think about it in any way and just do it, because to get over the socially conditioned perspective of drinking your own piss, if you think about it too much and you savour the taste and the smell, yeah, it's going to be a lot more challenging. And once I drank it, it wasn't so bad. It was the smell that was probably the hardest part. But, 5 seconds and it's all over. And not long after I had done that, I began to feel the second wave kicking in. And I was very, very impressed with the effects. I was storming around the bushes trying to look for some more mushrooms. And I started to return to the campsite, and I must have been gone for over an hour now. And what I was noticing is my thinking turned into images. There was no longer words in my mind sort of fluttering around. It was very sequential images, almost like I was watching a stop-motion video in my mind. And I would have problems that I had in my life, and I was getting answers and solving these problems incredibly fast. Seconds, and I could solve a very complicated problem. I was very, very amazed by this. In fact, it felt as if I was using more of my brain, which was very, very interesting to say the least. And I still am very curious as to the effects these mushrooms have on consciousness. And so I'm storming back to the campsite, and I go back and I tell my friends what's going on, and how they are completely safe, and how I drank my piss, and and everything that was going on. I even gave them a hug, telling them how I felt about them, and it was very nice. I wonder what it looked like from their perspective. But nonetheless, I was in a very good space, and I shared with them my experience, and then I went off again into the bush. And that's when things started to get a little bit more strong and intense, because my mind was still very clear and going at a very fast pace, but then I started to lose motor control. And I started to lose control over my body completely, actually, eventually. But what was happening is I was trying to walk, and my body did not want to follow my commands, and it was very, very hard to actually walk. Eventually, I got to my intended destination, which was next to this stream, which is a often visited stream by the Helpex crew, and we have a nice tarp there, and it's very beautiful and very calm. But it took a monumental effort to get there. And once I did, the last things I remember that actually definitely happened was I tipped out all of the contents of my bag, which includes my speaker and my phone. I just tipped them all out on the floor. And I had lost the fight to control my body. I lost complete control, and then what happens after, I do not know if it was objective reality, a dream, or the trip itself. So what the next thing I remember is I am running, and I am running, and I am running, and I am running through the bush, and with no destination, I'm just going. And after, I don't know how long, I started to get a pain in my chest. I sort of stopped running for a moment. I start to breathe, and when I do that, I have very strong pain in my chest, and I start running again, and I stop, and I have this pain, and I have these deep breaths, and then I start getting to the thought lines that, maybe these mushrooms are actually poisonous, and I have just been running for I don't know how long, and my heart is actually starting to really hurt now. Am I just going to keep running forever and until I have a heart attack or something? Is that what's going to happen? And after a while I started to get very, very worried and scared, and then I come to the conclusion that, yeah, I'm actually going to die. The pain in my chest become incredible and so intense, and I started to get very delusional and believing that I wasn't actually seeing what I was seeing, and I was back at the campsite experiencing my last moments on a poisonous mushroom trip. And I remember the last things I was saying was, I love you guys, and tell my family I love them, and all this, and I'm sorry, and then I come to terms with my death. I accepted my death, and then in every sense of the word, I died. And not long after I had died, the pain of death disappeared, and I was actually greeted by all of these light beings. They had a humanoid form, but their body was made up of what could only be described as a starry night sky with turquoise twinge. It was absolutely beautiful, and they were all clapping me and cheering me, and well done, you made it, and they were saying like I had graduated from the third dimensional level of reality and was on to the next dimensional level. And this was, of course, extremely overwhelming, but in the midst of it all, I went with it. And not long after that began my life review. And I experienced every single negative emotion, thought and feeling that I had experienced throughout this life. And it was felt as pain throughout my body. And this was incredibly intense. Words do not do justice for the sensations I was experiencing. And then I had the opposite of this, and all of the positive and pleasurable things in my life I experienced as sensations throughout the body, and this was absolutely amazing. I was just screaming at the top of my lungs in absolute ecstasy as my whole body vibrated with this pleasurable joy. And this was many, many, many more times pleasurable than the strongest orgasm I have ever experienced. And so that went on for I don't know how long. Some of my friends reported that I was screaming for nearly an hour, and my scream changed from like one of pain to one of joy, and so who knows how long I was actually in that period for. And then after that, I began communication with a entity. I mean, I'm not a religious man, but the only way I could describe this entity was some form of God's spirit. It had a huge, the spirit itself was huge in comparison to me, and they had a long grey beard and grey hair, and they were dressed in white. And I began a communication about many different things. Unfortunately, I can't remember most of the conversation. I just remember that it happened. And I was shown part of my life journey and where it may go in the future, and some of the possible futures for humanity itself. And after that, the next thing I can remember happening was I experienced how this reality, this universe, is made up of layers. And there is progression possible through each of these layers. And the Ra material, the Law of One, puts this into great perspective. And how there is 7, supposedly, in this universe, and we can progress through all of them. And then I saw the creator itself, or the universe, it was like this ball of light, and how there were many, many creators or universes all sort of together, and beyond that it was impossible to describe with words what I was actually experiencing. And again, who knows how long I was in all of this for. But when all this came to a close, I genuinely believed I was about to start the new chapter in my life in the next dimension. And then, blam, I was back in my body. It was pitch black. I had lost my shirt, and I had no idea where I was. This was, of course, very surprising, but then very quickly I was very worried about how am I going to survive in the night with no just my Alibabas on. And so I went into survival mode and found the nearest place I could sit. I sat down, and I began to go into my mind to try and keep myself warm, and that didn't work. So then I had to, because it was icy cold, and it was also not far off of the new moon, so it was pitch black. I couldn't see my hands. So this was a very severe situation to be in. and I was getting very cold, and my mind was getting very worried, of course. So the only thing I could think of was I had to do this ridiculous position where I got my entire body into my Alibabas, and I was lucky I was wearing my Alibabas because they were extremely stretchable, and I got my whole body in there, and I was circulating the warm air. And this potentially proved life-saving because it did warm up the core of my body. I mean, my feet and legs were freezing cold. Luckily, I believe these mushrooms also reduce pain, so that helped. But yeah, and I couldn't keep this position for forever because it was such a ridiculous position to get my whole body in my Alibabas. So I would switch between being in this position and then sitting up and being in the freezing cold, but letting my body rest and removing the pain slightly, and then I'd go back, and I must have repeated this for 5 or so hours, and by the time there actually started to be light and the sun started to come up, my body was shaking, a precursor for hypothermia, but I was so relieved to see the lights, and after about half an hour I could see where I was, and actually, luckily I wasn't too far away from where I began, which was near the tarpaulin near the stream. When I realised where I was, I got up and I ran back to the campsite, and I got back into my bed and I wrote down my experience, had some food, rejoiced in being alive and warm, I told the story to my friends and had the most amazing sleep. And I was incredibly grateful to have this experience and incredibly lucky to be wearing my Alibabas, as that really did prove life-saving. So, if anyone is considering taking these mushrooms, I would advise to be prepared for what's going to happen, as it's not like any other drug I have tried before. I've tried DMT, psilocybin mushrooms, and LSD in terms of psychedelics, and this is nothing like those. It's very different. So do the research, be prepared, and if possible have a sitter to look after you during this time, because you may well go into another dimension. If you take a slightly smaller amount, I believe the effects are very different, and I will cover that in another talk about my other experiences with these mushrooms. But to round up the first experience I had with these mushrooms, it was absolutely transcendental. It was an amazing experience, and although it was life-threatening, I am so glad it happened, because who knows, maybe I did really experience what happens when we die. And if so, death is nothing to be feared. In fact, it's something to look forward to and to prepare for. Similar to what the ancient Egyptians thought of death. But who knows? No one can really know, I guess. Or maybe we can, but who knows?